In the gray autumn of 1979, Hazel Thorne was 58 years old, and she was left with $1,043 and a dead lighthouse. She thought, that autumn, that she had known the man she had been married to for 31 years. She was wrong. She had not known him at all, and it would take a locked steel box at the top of 200 iron stairs, and a whole hard winter of learning to read what he had written in the dark, before she understood the size of the thing she had been wrong about. Her husband, Eli Thorne, had died on the 4th of October, quietly, in the front room of the little house on Cormorant Lane, with the tide coming in and Hazel holding his hand. He had been a scallop fisherman all his working life, a lean, weathered, unhurried man who did not waste words, and Hazel had loved him for the steadiness of him, for the way he came in from the water each evening smelling of salt and diesel, and put his hands flat on the kitchen table as if he were making sure the world was still solid. They had no children. They had the house and the boat and 31 years, and Hazel had believed, right up until the morning the lawyer opened the folder, that they had a little put-by besides, enough she had always assumed that a woman would not be frightened if she found herself alone. The lawyer's name was Merrick, and he had an office over the hardware store, and he did not enjoy the thing he had to do that morning. He read the will, which was short, and then he read the rest of it, which was long, and the longer he read the quieter the room became. The house on Cormorant Lane was mortgaged. It had been remortgaged twice, the second time only 2 years before, and the payments behind it were 3 months in arrears. The boat, the Mary Thorne, on which Eli had made their living for 26 years, had been sold the previous spring to cover a lien Hazel had never heard of, and Eli had gone on going down to the harbor every morning after that as though he still had a deck under his feet. The savings account held, on the morning of the reading, $1,043. "I don't understand," Hazel said when Merrick stopped. Her voice sounded strange to her, very level, very far away. "He went to work every day. He never, Misty, Merrick, we never wanted for anything." "Where did it go, Mrs. Thorne?" the lawyer said, and he took his glasses off, which she would remember afterward, because a man takes his glasses off when he does not want to see your face clearly while he says a hard thing. "I wish I could tell you. I've been Eli's lawyer 11 years, and I did not draw those mortgages. He did that at the bank, on his own. Whatever the money went to, he did not put it through this office, and he did not tell me, and I am sorry, but I do not know." "Then, what is left?" Hazel asked. "What is there?" Merrick turned to the last page. He looked at it a long moment, as though he were deciding whether to be ashamed of it. "There's the balance in the account," he said. $1,043. "And there is one piece of real property, held free and clear, in Eli's name, that carries no mortgage at all." He looked up at her. Weatherly Point. Hazel Thorne knew Weatherly Point the way everyone in Ash Harbor knew it, as the thing on the headland that was not there anymore. The Weatherly Point Lighthouse had stood at the mouth of the harbor for as long as the town had existed, a white stone tower on a spit of black rock, and its light had gone out 11 years before, in 1968, when the government had decided the shipping had thinned and the cost was too high, and a lighted buoy would do the same work for a fraction of the money. They had darkened the lamp and boarded the door and let the salt begin its slow work, and in 11 years the sea air had eaten the paint off the tower and the rot into the cottage, and the county had at last condemned the whole thing as a hazard and put it on a list of structures to be pulled down. It was worth, as real estate, less than nothing. It was a liability with a light on top that no longer lit. "A lighthouse," Hazel said. "A condemned lighthouse," Merrick said gently. "Hazel, I have to be honest with you, because nobody else is going to be. That property is a stone around your neck. The county wants it down. There's a demolition order already filed. Now, there is one piece of good news in that, if you can call it good. The county has offered a settlement to clear the title. If you sign the point over to them, they'll pay you a small sum toward the demolition and take the liability off your hands. It isn't much, but it's more than that pile of rock will ever be worth to you, and it would leave you free." "How much?" Hazel said. Merrick hesitated. $1,200. Hazel almost laughed, and the laugh, if it had come out, would have frightened her, so she held it. $1,200. For the sea lash tower where, she remembered now, Eli had spent a great many evenings in the last few years of his life. She had asked him about it, once or twice. "Where do you go, Eli, in the evenings?" And he had said, "Up to the point. Just to look at the water." And she had thought it a sad old man's habit, going to sit by a dark lighthouse to watch the sea he had worked his whole life, and she had let him have it, and she had never once gone with him. "I'll think about it," she said. "Don't think too long," Merrick said, not unkindly. "The demolition's calendared for the spring." She did not sign that day. She went home to the mortgaged house on Cormorant Lane, and she sat at the kitchen table where Eli had put his hands flat every evening for 31 years, and she tried to make the arithmetic come out to something that was not terror, and it would not. $1,043. The house would go to the bank. There was no saving it. She was 58, she had not held a paying job since before she married, and in 6 weeks or 8 she would be a widow with a single suitcase and no roof, and the only thing in the world that was hers, free and clear, was a condemned lighthouse the county would pay her $1,200 to let them tear down. The town, when it heard, was kind in the way towns are kind, which is to say, it had opinions. The women brought casseroles and the men touched their caps, and within a week the advice had begun, gentle and unanimous. "Sign the point over, Hazel. Take the county's money. What would you do with the lighthouse?" The bank manager came himself. His name was Coombs, and he was a decent enough man. And he sat in the kitchen and turned his hat in his hands and told her how sorry he was, and then he told her the rest of it because it was his job. "The house, Hazel," he said. "I have to be straight with you. The arrears, the 2 mortgages, there's no way through it that I can see. The bank's going to have to take the house. I'll give you every week I can, you understand me, but by spring, sooner or later, it'll have to go." He looked at his hat. "I hate this part of the work. I want you to know that. I stood up with Eli at your wedding." "I know you did, Harold," Hazel said. "There is one thing might ease it." He said it carefully, the way a man lays down a card he is not proud of. "You sign that demolition paper on the point, clear the county's title, and it looks better. For everybody. Shows you're being sensible. I could maybe find you another month in the house on the strength of it. And that lighthouse is nothing but trouble to you, Hazel. It's a stone falling into the sea. Let it go." Hazel looked at the man who had stood up at her wedding, telling her, kindly, in her own kitchen, to sign away the one thing Eli had left her free and clear so that the bank would think better of her while it took her home. She did not blame him. It was the sensible thing, and everyone in Ash Harbor could see it, and that was exactly what frightened her, that it was so sensible, so unanimous, so quick. "I'll think about it, Harold," she said, and Coombs, who had known her 30 years, heard something in the way she said it that made him look up sharply, but she gave him nothing more. And he went away without the signature he had come for. And then Eli's brother came. Eli's brother was named Royce Thorne, and he was 3 years younger than Eli had been, and he was everything Eli was not, big, loud, quick with a handshake, a man who had done well for himself in the marine supply trade 2 towns over and never let Ash Harbor forget it. He came to the house on Cormorant Lane in a good coat, and he sat in Eli's chair, which Hazel minded more than she let show, and he was very sorry, and then he came to the point. "Now, Hazel," Royce said, "I know this isn't the time, and I'm sorry to be the one, but somebody's got to look after you now that Eli's gone, and it may as well be family. That property up on the point." He shook his head. "It's a millstone. I've been up there. The tower's not safe, the cottage is half rotted, and the county's dead set on pulling it. You take their settlement, you clear the title, you don't have to think about it again. I'll handle the whole thing for you. Sign a little paper making me your representative, and I'll deal with Coombs in the county, and you won't have to lift a finger." "That's generous of you, Royce," Hazel said. "It's nothing. It's family." He patted her hand. "Only sensible thing to do." Eli, God rest him, was never a businessman. He held on to that rock for sentiment, and look where it got the two of you. Time to be practical. And there it was, the thing that stopped her. Not what he said, but the small, quick way he said, "Look where it got the two of you," as if he knew already where it had got them. As if the ruin of Eli's finances were a thing Royce Thorne had known about for some while. Hazel Thorne was not a suspicious woman by nature, but she had been married 31 years to a man who noticed things and said little, and she had learned from him to notice things too, and what she noticed now was that her brother-in-law was in a great hurry to be made her representative before she had so much as read a single one of Eli's papers herself. "I'll think about it," she said, for the second time in a week. Royce's face did something then. A flicker, quickly smoothed. "Don't think too long," he said, and it was almost word for word what the lawyer had said, but it did not sound the same coming from him. "That order won't wait." When he had gone, Hazel sat a long time in the dark kitchen. Then she got up and found the ring of keys that had been Eli's, the heavy ring he had carried all his life, and she turned it over under the lamp until she found the one key on it she did not recognize. An old iron key, long as her hand, black with age, worn bright at the bit. She had seen it 1,000 times and never asked. She knew now, the way you know a thing all at once, what door it opened. She drove out to Weatherly Point the next morning in Eli's truck, which the creditors had not yet found a way to take, along the coast road with the gray Atlantic heaving on her right hand, and she parked at the end of the gravel track and walked out onto the headland with the wind pulling at her coat. The lighthouse stood up against the racing sky, taller than she remembered and far more ruined, its white stones streaked rust brown, its lamp room a cracked glass crown gone blind at the top. The keeper's cottage crouched at its foot, shutters hanging, the little garden Eli's grandmother had kept gone to seagrass and thistle. A yellow county notice was nailed to the boarded door. Condemned, no entry. Hazel took the notice down. She put the long iron key in the cottage lock, and it turned. Stiff but sure, as if it had been oiled, and she understood that Eli had been coming here, that Eli had kept this door in working order. All those evenings he had told her he was going up to look at the water. She stepped inside. The cottage was cold and smelled of salt and old wood smoke, but it was not the ruin the outside had promised. Someone had kept it. The one downstairs room had a made bed against the wall, a chair, a small iron stove with kindling laid ready in it, a lamp with oil in it, a shelf of tinned food. On the table was a mug and a plate, washed and set to dry, as if the man who used them meant to come back. Eli had not been coming here to look at the water. Eli had been living here, or half living here, in secret, in a cottage the whole town believed was rotting empty, and Hazel Thorne stood in the doorway with her dead husband's keys in her hand and felt the ground of 31 years shift under her feet. "What were you doing, Eli?" she said aloud, to the cold room. "What were you doing up here?" She moved through the small room slowly, touching things. On a nail by the door hung an oilskin coat, his size stiff with salt. In a drawer she found a keeper's cap, and a tin of the hard peppermints he had always kept in his pocket on the boat, and a photograph she had never seen. The two of them, young, on their wedding day, standing on this very headland, with the light hole in white behind them, and the lens catching the sun over their heads. She had forgotten they were married here. His grandfather had still kept the light in those days, there had been cake in this cottage, and she a bride of 27 laughing in the wind. Hazel sat down on the made bed with the photograph in her hands and understood that Eli had not chosen this ruin at random for his secret evenings. He had come home. Whatever he was doing here, he had wanted, at the end. To do it in the one place the two of them had begun. "You should have told me," she said to the photograph, "whatever it was. You should have let me carry it with you." But there was a door at the back of the room, an inner door, and behind that door a spiral of iron stairs going up into the dark of the tower, and Hazel, who was 58 and had a bad knee and no reason in the world to climb a condemned lighthouse, put the photograph in her pocket, lit the lamp, and began to climb. 200 iron steps wound up the inside of the tower, past narrow slit windows that showed her the sea falling away below, and by the time she reached the top her knee was on fire, and her breath tore in her chest, and she had to stop and hold the rail. Above her was the lamp room, the glass chamber at the summit where the great light had once turned, and she climbed the last short ladder into it and stood up into a ring of cracked windows with the whole gray ocean spread out around her on every side, close enough, it felt, to touch. The lens was still there. That was the first thing she saw. And it took her breath worse than the stairs had. She had assumed the government would have stripped it, but there it stood in the center of the lamp room, taller than a man. A great tiered beehive of glass prisms gone dull with grime and salt, but whole. A first-order Fresnel lens, though she did not know the name of it then, a thing of 1,000 cut-glass rings built to gather a single flame and throw it 20 miles out to sea. It was the most beautiful thing Hazel Thorne had ever stood next to, and it was dead, and someone had been cleaning it. One wide arc of the prisms, at eye level, had been wiped clear, and the cloth that had wiped it lay folded on the brass rail, and she knew the fault. She had folded 1,000 cloths that way herself, in 31 years of the same kitchen. Eli had stood here, in the cold, wiping the dead glass, alone, and beside the lens, bolted to the iron floor where the keeper's watch desk had always stood, was a steel box. It was not large, the size perhaps of a case a man might carry tools in, gray painted metal, riveted, with a heavy hasp and a padlock, and it was bolted down so that it could not be carried off. Hazel knelt beside it, her knee shrieking, and she went through Eli's keys, and none of them fit the padlock, and for a moment she nearly wept with the frustration of it, to have climbed all that way to a locked box she could not open. Then she remembered the way Eli hid things, which was never far, because he trusted the sea and the weather to keep off anyone who did not belong. And she ran her hand along the underside of the brass rail and found, taped there with tape gone brittle, a small flat key. The padlock opened. Hazel lifted the lid of the steel box and knelt in the cold lamp room at the top of the world and looked at what her husband had hidden there, and did not understand, at first, what she was looking at. There was no money. That was her first thought. Quick and ashamed, some part of her had climbed all that way hoping for banded bills, for the answer to the arithmetic that spelled terror at the kitchen table. There was no money. There was paper. The box was full of paper, ordered and dry and carefully kept, and she lifted the first of it out into the gray light and began, slowly, to read. On top was a ledger. It was a keeper's log, bound in cracked black cloth, and when she opened it, the pages were filled with Eli's small square hand, but not only Eli's. The early entries were in an older, browner ink, a different hand, dated in the years before Hazel was born, and then another hand after that, and then, in the most recent third of the book, Eli's own. It was a log of the light. Every night for decades someone had written down the weather, the state of the sea, the ships that passed, the ships that did not, the wrecks, the near wrecks, the boats brought safe past the rocks by the turning of the weatherly light. She turned to the last filled page, and it was dated 3 days before Eli died, and in his small square hand it said only, "Clear, wind swow freshening. Nothing out tonight. Kept the glass. Kept the light in my mind, if not in the lamp. It still knows where the shoal is, even if the town has forgot. E.T." "Oh, Eli," Hazel said. "Oh, you foolish man. What is this? Under the ledger was a chart. It was hand-drawn, on heavy paper, and it was a chart of the harbor mouth and the waters off Weatherly Point, drawn with a care that made her think of the way Eli mended net, every line true. And on it, half a mile off the point, in waters the printed government charts showed as open and safe, Eli had drawn a shoal. He had marked it, and sounded it, and dated his soundings across 40 years. And beside it he had written in his square hand, Kelp Ledge. Not on the Fed chart. Bare at spring low, 2 fathom at neap, breaks in any sea from the SE. Took the Gull, 52. Took the Prosper, 61. Took 2 draggers I know of before my time. The buoy they put out don't mark it. The light did. E.T. Hazel sat back on her heels. She was a fisherman's wife. She knew what she was reading. There was a killing ground out there in the harbor mouth, a submerged ledge that had torn the bottom out of boats for 100 years, and the government's decision to darken the Weatherly Light and replace it with a lighted buoy had been made by men in an office who did not know the ledge was there, because it was not on their charts. It was on Eli's. Only on Eli's. The dead light had been the one thing that told a boat coming in from the southeast at night where the Kelp Ledge lay, and for 11 years, since they put it out, that knowledge had gone dark with it, and Eli Thorne had climbed 200 stairs in the evenings to sit beside the blind lens with the only map of the danger in his lap, unable to make the town believe it mattered. But it was the third thing in the box that changed everything. Under the chart, in a stiff leather folder gone green at the corners, were the deeds. Hazel opened the folder with cold fingers. The topmost document was old, the paper heavy and furred, the ink faded to sepia, and across the top in an ornate government hand it read, Deed of Grant, and below that, United States Lighthouse Establishment, and it was dated 1911. She read it 3 times before she trusted it. In the language of another century, the document granted the Weatherly Point Lighthouse Reservation, the tower, the cottage, the Black Rock headland, and a described frontage of the harbor shore, not to the town of Ash Harbor and not to the county, but in fee, to the keeper of the light and to the keeper's heirs and assigns forever, in consideration of the perpetual keeping of the light, so long as a light was kept, a private grant of a kind the government had made in a few old cases to bind a keeper's family to a hard and lonely post. The first keeper named on the grant was a man called Josiah Weatherly, and clipped behind the 1911 grant, in an unbroken chain of yellowed conveyances, the reservation passed down, Weatherly to Weatherly, and then, by marriage, Weatherly to Thorne, and then, Thorne to Thorne, down and down the generations to the last conveyance of all, a plain deed dated only 4 years before, transferring the whole Weatherly Point reservation, tower and cottage and headland and harbor frontage, to Eli Thorne. Eli owned it. Not a condemned pile of rock the county was doing him a favor to haul away, he owned the headland and a described length of the Ash Harbor waterfront, held under a federal grant that predated the town's charter, held so long as a light was kept. And clipped to the very back of the folder, the newest paper of all, was a bundle that made Hazel's hands go still. Tax receipts. Dozens of them. For 11 years, quietly, out of the money that should have been their savings, out of the money that had cost them the house and the boat and left her with $1,043, Eli Thorne had been paying the back taxes, not only on the point, but, she saw as she went through them, on lot after lot of the dying harbor waterfront, buying up the tax liens on the failing wharves and the empty net lofts and the shuttered fish houses of Ash Harbor, one delinquent parcel at a time, and holding them, and telling no one, not even her. "You spent it," Hazel whispered. "You spent everything we had on this." She did not understand it yet, but she understood this much. Kneeling in the cold at the top of the tower, with the sea roaring below and her dead husband's whole secret life spread out on the iron floor around her, that Eli Thorne had not been a fool who lost their money, and he had not been a sad old man watching the water. He had been keeping something. He had been keeping it in the dark, alone, at a cost that had ruined them, for a reason he had not lived long enough to tell her. And her brother-in-law Royce, who had done well in the marine supply trade 2 towns over, had been in a very great hurry to make Hazel sign it all away before she ever climbed these stairs. She did not sign the county's paper. She drove back to Ash Harbor that afternoon, with the ledger and the chart and the deeds wrapped in her coat, and she went to see Merrick the lawyer, and she put the 1911 grant on his desk, and she watched a lawyer's face change. "Where did you get this?" Merrick said, very quietly, when he had read it. "My husband hid it in the Lighthouse," Hazel said. "Is it real?" Merrick got up and closed his office door, which he had not done for the reading of the will. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, "if this is what it appears to be, and I will need to send to the state archives to be sure, then the county cannot condemn Weatherly Point, because the county does not own it and never did. And there is more than that." He tapped the described frontage on the old grant, his finger not quite steady. "This describes a length of the harbor shore. Do you know what's on the harbor shore? The wharves," Hazel said, "the net lofts, the old fish houses. Everything the towns let go to ruin. Everything," Merrick said, "that the Halloran Resort Company has been trying to buy for 2 years to build a marina and a hotel. There's a sale in front of the town council right now. Hazel, a big one. The town's broke, and Halloran's offering to take the whole dead waterfront off its hands cheap, and half the council can't wait to sign, and the fishermen who still work out of there are going to be put off the water they've fished for 100 years. He looked at the deed, and then at her. "If this grant holds, some of that shore is not the town's to sell. It's yours. And you, Mrs. Thorne, would be the only thing standing between Halloran and the harbor." Hazel Thorne sat in the lawyer's office and felt the last piece of it turn over and lock into place, and it was not about her at all, and it never had been. Royce in his good coat, in Eli's chair, so sorry, so eager to be made her representative, so quick to get the point signed away before she read a word. Royce, in the marine supply trade 2 towns over, the marine supply trade that would furnish out a brand new resort marina very handsomely indeed. "My brother-in-law," she said slowly, "wanted me to make him my representative, to handle the point, and the county settlement." She looked up. "Mr. Merrick, is my brother-in-law connected to the Halloran Company?" Merrick was quiet a moment. "I don't know," he said. "But I think, Mrs. Thorne, that you had better let me find out before you sign a single thing that man puts in front of you." She drove home in the early dark, and the coast road ran along the water. And out at the harbor mouth, where the Weatherly light had turned for 100 years, there was nothing now but blackness, and the far dim wink of the lighted buoy that did not know where the kelp ledge lay. And Hazel Thorne, 58 years old, with $1,043 and a dead lighthouse and a dead husband whose secret she had only just begun to read, understood what she was going to do, though she did not yet know how she would do it. She was going to keep the light. Eli had spent everything they had to hold the point and the waterfront so that a Thorne would still own the harbor when Halloran came for it. He had climbed 200 stairs in the dark to keep watch over a ledge no chart knew, because he could not bear that a boat should die on it for want of a light. He had failed to make the town listen, and he had failed to make the town see, and he had died with all of it locked in a steel box. And Hazel understood, with a grief that was different now, sharper and prouder, that the reason he had never told her was that he had not wanted to frighten her with a fight he thought he could finish alone. He had run out of time. Now it was hers. And she would not sell it, and she would not sign it away, and above all she would do the one thing that the whole grant, the whole 100-year-old bargain, turned upon. She was going to relight the lamp, because the grant held so long as a light was kept, and because somewhere out on the water on a bad night that had not come yet, a boat was going to come in from the southeast toward the kelp ledge, and Hazel Thorne meant to be the reason it did not die there. The town, when it heard what the widow Thorne intended, did exactly what her husband had spent 11 years learning it would do. It laughed. Not unkindly, Ash Harbor was not a cruel town, but thoroughly, over coffee and across counters. The sad, soft laughter of practical people at a grieving woman's folly. Hazel Thorne, who could not save her own house, was going to save a condemned lighthouse. Hazel Thorne, 58, was going to climb 200 stairs and light a lamp the government itself had given up on. She had taken the death of poor Eli hard, they said, and small wonder. And now she had got some notion in her head about that rock on the point, and the kindest thing was to let it run its course until the cold and the loneliness brought her back to her senses and the county's $1,200. The laughter had a place, and the place was the general store on Front Street, where the men gathered by the stove in the mornings, and Hazel walked into the middle of it one gray day in November, come in for lamp oil and wicks and the particular soft cloth the ledger said to clean the prisms with. The talk stopped when the bell over the door rang, the way talk stops when its subject walks in, and then started again. Lower, she heard the word Lighthouse and a low chuckle, and she took her list to the counter and said what she wanted, plainly, and the storekeeper, a heavy, careful man named Alden, filled it without meeting her eye, because he was ashamed and did not know how to say so. It was one of the men by the stove who spoke, an older man she knew slightly, named Foss, who said it for the room and not quite to her. Buying lamp oil? Hazel? What's a body want with all that lamp oil? And when she did not answer at once, he pushed it, gently the way a man pushes at a thing he is sure of. You're not really going up there to light that old ruin. Tell me you're not. Government spent a fortune to shut that light down. Decided the whole coast didn't need it. And you're going to light it back up with a can of oil and a bad knee? The room laughed, softly, and waited for her to be embarrassed. Hazel took her change from Alden and put it in her coat. And then she turned and looked at Foss, and she was not embarrassed, and that was the thing that changed the sound in the room. The government, she said, shut that light down because a man in an office decided the shipping had thinned and a buoy was cheaper. He'd never been out past the point in a blow in his life. There's a ledge out there, Mr. Foss, half a mile off the harbor mouth, that his charts don't show and his buoy doesn't mark. It took the Gull, and it took the Prosper, and it'll take another boat on a bad night out of the southeast, and when it does, the men that laughed at me for buying lamp oil are going to stand on the wharf and wonder how it happened. She buttoned her coat. My husband knew where that ledge was. He tried to tell this town for 11 years, and this town laughed at him the way you're laughing at me. I'm done being laughed out of a thing that's true. Good day. She walked out with the bell jangling behind her, and her ears did burn, because she was not a woman who liked to make a speech, and she had never in her life said so much at once to a room full of men. But behind her the store was quiet, and Foss was not laughing. And old Alden the storekeeper came out from behind his counter to the door and called after her, awkwardly, that he'd have more of that lamp oil in on Thursday if she wanted it, and would carry it out to the point himself. It was the first help anyone had offered her, and it had come, she noticed, the moment she stopped asking to be believed and simply told them the truth and let them keep it or not. Royce did not laugh. Royce came to the cottage on the point, where Hazel had moved her single suitcase and made up the keeper's bed, and this time there was less of the good coat about him and more of something harder underneath. "You've been to the lawyer," he said in the doorway. He did not sit. "You found Eli's papers." "I found my husband's papers," Hazel said, "in my husband's lighthouse." "Yes, Hazel," he spread his hands, "reasonable, warm, and only a little too quick. Whatever Eli told you those papers are worth, he was a dreamer, and dreamers get families hurt. That old grant is 100-year-old scrap. It won't hold up. You'll spend money you don't have on lawyers to be told what the county already knows, that pile of rock is a liability and it's coming down. Let me take it off your hands. I'll give you more than the county will. 2,000. Cash, this week. You take it, and you go somewhere warm, and you let an old fight die with the man who started it. And there it was. $2,000 from Royce's own pocket, this week, cash, for a 100-year-old scrap of paper he had just told her was worthless. Hazel looked at her brother-in-law standing in the low doorway of the cottage his brother had died keeping secret. And she was not angry. Quite. She was something colder and clearer than angry. Eli knew, she said. That's it, isn't it, Royce? Eli knew what Halloran was, and he knew what you were, and he spent every dollar the two of us had buying up this shore one lien at a time, so that when your resort people came for the harbor, there'd be a Thorne holding the deed to stand in the door. He couldn't make the town listen. So he made sure the town couldn't sell what wasn't theirs. And you've been waiting for him to die so you could get it away from me before I understood what I had. Royce's face closed like a door. You're a grieving woman alone on a rock, he said, and the warmth was all gone out of it now. You've got $1,000 and no house. You cannot fight the county, and you cannot fight Halloran, and you cannot fight me. Be sensible, Hazel. Take the 2,000. Get out of Eli's cottage, Hazel said. He went, and Hazel Thorne shut the salt warp door behind him and stood in the cold with her heart going hard and knew that she had just turned down 4 times the money in her bank account from the one man in the world the law called her family, and that she was, by every practical measure that Ash Harbor lived by, a fool. Then she took the ledger down from the shelf and lit the lamp and began to learn how to keep a light. It was not simple, and no one helped her at first. The lamp itself, the great Fresnel lens, was intact, but filthy, its brass green, its clockwork seized, its oil reservoir dry, and its wicks perished. The government had removed the electric gear when they darkened it in 1968, meaning to sell the copper, but they had left the old oil-burning apparatus beneath it, the original works from before the light was electrified, because it was obsolete and worth nothing to them. Eli, Hazel came to see as she read his ledger by lamplight through those first hard weeks, had understood that this was the light's salvation. The electric plant was gone and could not be restored without money and permission she would never get, but the original oil light, the light Josiah Weatherly had first shown in the 1800s, needed nothing but oil and wicks and a keeper's hands. And it belonged to the tower, and no one could say she might not clean and mend what was already hers. So Hazel cleaned it. She climbed the 200 stairs each morning with her bad knee, counting them under her breath the way she came to count them every day for years, and she washed the 1,000 glass prisms of the lens one arc at a time with vinegar and soft cloth, the way the ledger told her, the way Eli had begun and not lived to finish. It was slow, cold, exacting work. The prisms were cut in tiers and rings, hundreds of little beveled faces, and each had to be wiped clean and clear without scratching, and her fingers cracked in the cold and bled a little onto the cloth, and some mornings she got through no more than a single section before her hands would not close any more, and she had to go down and warm them at the stove. But the ledger was patient, and so, she found, was she. Day by day the great lens came up out of 11 years of grime, arc by arc, and stood clear and cold, and threw broken rainbows on the lamp-room floor when the sun struck it, and Hazel would stand in those falling colors and understand, a little more each day, the thing that had kept a tired old fisherman climbing these stairs alone, that there is a particular peace in tending something beautiful and useful that asks nothing of you but care. She freed the seized clockwork with oil and patience and a fisherman's feel for stubborn machinery, learned from a lifetime of watching Eli coax a dead engine back to life over a cold water. She scraped and polished the brass until it glowed, and in the evenings, too tired to climb, she sat at the cottage table with the ledger and read her way down the years, the old keeper's hands and then Eli's, and she came to know the men who had kept this light before her the way you know the writers of old letters, by the turn of their words. She learned that a keeper named Weatherly had held the light alone through the influenza year, and buried his own wife on the headland and gone up the same night to show the flame. She learned that Eli's grandfather had rowed out in an open dory in a November gale to a schooner on the rocks and taken off 4 men and lost 2 fingers to the frost of it. And she learned, reading the last third of the book in Eli's square hand, how alone her husband had been in it, and how faithful, writing his nightly entry to no one, keeping a watch no one had asked him to keep, for 11 years, because he could not make himself believe that a coast should go dark just because an office had done the arithmetic. She found, in the cottage, cases of lamp oil Eli had laid in, and spare wicks and trimming scissors, and a keeper's manual older than either of them, annotated in his square hand, and she understood that he had gathered, quietly, over years, everything a person would need to bring the Weatherly Light back to life. Everything except the last thing, which was time, and a keeper to spend it. She was the keeper now. She spent the time. The town watched the widow climb the tower each day and shook its head. But an odd thing happened, slowly, through November and into December, as the cleaned lens began to catch the low sun and flash from the headland by day. The old fishermen began to come. Not the councilmen, not the ones with an eye on Halloran's money, but the old ones. The ones who still took small boats out for scallop and lobster in the hard months. The ones who remembered when the Weatherly Light turned. They came up the gravel track by ones and twos, cap in hand, and stood in the cottage doorway, and said awkward, halting things. My father brought the cormorant home past that light in the blow of 49, an old man named Petrie told her, turning his cap in his hands. Couldn't see the hand in front of your face. Come in on the Weatherly Light the whole way. My father always said if it'd been dark that night the whole crew was lost, and I'd not be standing here today, for it was my father's boat and my father's crew. He looked at the tower. They never should have put it out. There's a bad ledge out there the buoy don't mark. Eli always said so. Nobody listened to Eli. I know about the ledge, Mr. Petrie, Hazel said. It's called the Kelp Ledge. My husband charted it. It took the Gull in 52 and the Prosper in 61, and it's 2 fathom at neap and bare at spring low, and it breaks in any sea from the southeast. She watched the old man's mouth fall open. Eli left me everything he knew, and I mean to keep the light. After that they helped her. Petrie and his brother came and hauled fresh oil up the 200 stairs so her knee was spared. A retired boatwright named Suggs, who had built the Mary Thorne's cabin 30 years before and grieved her sail, rebuilt the rotted window frames of the lamp room so the weather would stay out. The men who still worked the water, who had the most to lose if Halloran took the harbor, formed themselves without ever quite saying so into the crew of a lighthouse that officially did not exist, and Hazel Thorne, who 6 weeks before had been a widow alone with a suitcase, found she was the keeper of a light and the reason a dozen old men had remembered they were not finished yet. On the night of the 14th of December, 1979, Hazel Thorne relit the Weatherly Light. She did it alone, at dusk, though half the harbor's old fishermen stood down on the rocks in the cold to see. She climbed the stairs with the last of the oil in the reservoir, and the wicks trimmed and the great lens clean, and she filled the lamp, and she set the flame to the wick the way the ledger told her, and she wound the freed clockwork that turned the lens, and she stood back. And the flame caught, and grew, and steadied, and the huge Fresnel lens gathered that one small fire into itself through its 1,000 rings of glass, and threw it out. A long white arm of light sweeping out across the black water, turning, sweeping again, reaching, the ledger said, 20 miles to sea. For the first time in 11 years the Weatherly Light was burning. Down on the rocks the old men took off their caps, and one of them, Hazel could not tell which, was weeping, and out in the dark harbor the light swept over the water, and found, and lit, and passed on, and found again. Hazel stood in the lamp room beside the turning lens with the tears cold on her own face, and she spoke to the man who was not there. "There," she said. "It's lit, Eli. I don't know all of what you are doing yet, but it's lit, and I'll keep it, and whatever's coming, it'll not come to a dark harbor. You can rest." The light burning changed things in the town, and not everyone was glad. To the fishermen it was a wonder and a rallying point. Boats began, without any order to steer by it again coming in at night, and the harbor felt watched over in a way it had not for a decade. But to the councilmen who had all but signed with Halloran, and to the county that had a demolition order it now could not enforce over a working aid to navigation on privately deeded ground, the relit light was a problem. And to Royce Thorne and the Halloran Company, whose whole cheap purchase of the waterfront depended on the town being able to sell shore that Eli's grant said was not entirely the town's to sell, Hazel Thorne up on her rock with her burning lamp and her 100-year-old deed was no longer a grieving woman to be handled. She was an obstacle worth money to remove. They tried the law first. Halloran's lawyers and the counties took the position that the 1911 grant was void, abandoned. They said, when the light went dark in 1968, a grant conditioned on keeping a light could not survive 11 years of darkness, and the reservation had reverted, and the town could sell, and the widow was trespassing on county property with an unauthorized fire hazard. It was a clever argument, and it frightened Hazel badly, because it turned her own 11 years of the light being dark into the weapon against her. But Merrick, who had by now heard back from the state archives that the 1911 grant was genuine and recorded and unbroken, had an answer. And the answer was Eli. The condition was that a light be kept, Merrick told the county's lawyers, in the town hall, with the fishermen filling the back of the room. Not that a light burn every single night without fail. No keeper in history managed that through every storm and every illness. The condition was keeping. And I have here he laid the black ledger on the table, an unbroken keeper's log of Weatherly Point, maintained by hand every year. Through the entire period, you claim the grant was abandoned, including the 11 years the lamp was dark. Eli Thorne kept the light. He kept the watch. He kept the log. He maintained the apparatus. He charted the hazards. He paid the taxes. Here are the receipts. And the moment a keeper was again able to show the flame was shown. There was no abandonment. There was a keeper doing exactly what the grant required, in the dark, without pay, without thanks, for 11 years. The grant holds. The room was very quiet. And old Petrie stood up in the back, cap in hand, and said, "I'll swear to it. Soul every man here." Eli Thorne was up on that point, keeping that light going in his own way every year of them 11, and we all knew it. And we let the town laugh at him for it, and we were wrong. A low sound of agreement went round the fishermen. You want to say nobody kept the Weatherly light? You say it to us. The county's lawyer looked at the ledger and at the room and asked for a recess. But it was not the law in the end. That settled it. It was the sea, the way it always is on that coast. It was a night in the third week of February 1980, when the worst gale of that winter came up out of the southeast, the exact quarter. Hazel knew from Eli's chart, from which a sea breaks over the kelp ledge, and caught the scallop dragger Providence out past the harbor mouth, running for home too late with her gear fouled and her engine faltering. In the black and the snow, with the buoy she could not see, and a ledge on her course that the government's chart swore was open water. Hazel was in the lamproom when it began, because she was in the lamproom every night now, and she felt the gale come on the way you feel a train coming through the ground before you hear it. The wind backed into the southeast and rose, and the snow came with it, thick and level, driving flat against the seaward glass so that the great beam went out into a wall of white and came back blind. The whole tower trembled with each gust, a deep iron shudder she felt in the soles of her boots, and Hazel trimmed the wick high and kept the clockwork wound and stood her watch. Because that was what a keeper did on the nights the light was made for, and this was such a night. She had brought the radio up from the cottage weeks before, the little set the fisherman had rigged her, and she kept it on the watch desk beside Eli's chart, and near midnight it crackled, and a voice came out of the storm. It was young, and it was doing its best to be calm, and Hazel knew at once from the way it was failing at that a boat was in trouble. Any station. Any station. This is the dragger Providence. Ash Harbor. Does anybody read the Providence? A burst of static swallowed it. Then it came back. I've got a fouled wheel and my engine's overheating, and I'm making about 2 knots in this, and I've lost my visibility altogether. I'm somewhere off the harbor mouth on dead reckoning, and I can't. I don't have the buoy. I can't see the buoy. I don't rightly know where I am. Anybody read? She knew the boat. Dunphy's boat, the young skipper with the 2 crew. A good boat, and a careful man caught out too late by a sea that had come up faster than the forecast. She knew, too, from long years as a fisherman's wife listening to that same radio in her kitchen through worse nights than this, exactly what somewhere off the harbor mouth, coming in on dead reckoning, out of the southeast, meant with the tide making the way it was making. It meant he was set, without knowing it, straight down onto the kelp ledge. And Hazel Thorne, alone at the top of the light, took up the radio and did the thing that 11 years of darkness had made impossible, and 1 relit lamp had made possible again. Providence. Providence. This is Weatherly Light, she said, and her voice did not shake, because she had Eli's chart open on the desk in front of her, and she knew, to the fathom, where the death was. Dunphy. Do you have my light? Do you see the Weatherly Light? A crackle then, Weatherly, light, I see you, I've got your light, thank God, I've been steering on the loom of you for 10 minutes not believing it. Now you listen to me, Hazel said, and you do exactly what I tell you. Because there is a ledge on your course the buoy doesn't mark and the chart doesn't show, and it will take the bottom out of you. It's called the kelp ledge. When you have my light, you do not steer for it. You bring my light onto your starboard bow and you hold it there, 2 points off, and you run that heading in, and you will pass north of the ledge in clear water all the way to the channel. Do you understand? Light on the starboard bow, 2 points off, and you'll clear the kelp ledge to the south of you. My husband charted it 40 years. I would stake your life on it, and I am. There was a silence full of storm. Then, small and steady, light on the starboard bow, 2 points off. Aye, bringing her round now. Hazel Thorne stood in the lamp room with the radio in her hand and the great light turning over her head and prayed, in her way, which was mostly holding very still and keeping the flame high. And out in the screaming dark the Providence came, blind, on a dying engine, steering by nothing in the world but a light a widow had relit against the advice of an entire town, on a heading a dead man had drawn in a ledger no chart maker had believed. She passed north of the kelp ledge, by, they reckoned afterward, 100 yards, in water that broke white over the killing ledge, to the south of her all the way in, and she made the channel, and she made the wharf, and Dunphy and his 2 crew came ashore alive into the arms of half of Ash Harbor, who had come down to the harbor in the storm because word had gone round that a boat was coming in. On the Weatherly Light. By morning the gale had blown itself out, and everybody in Ash Harbor knew what the widow Thorne's light had done, and nobody in Ash Harbor was laughing any more. Dunphy came up to the point the next day, still gray in the face, and he could not rightly speak, and he took Hazel's 2 hands in his and held them. There was a ledge, he said at last. You told me there was a ledge, and I steered your way, and I heard it break where I'd have been. There's no ledge on my chart. How? He stopped. How did you know? I didn't, Hazel said. My husband knew. He knew for 40 years, and he tried to tell this town, and this town put his light out and called him a foolish old man. He wrote it all down, Mr. Dunphy, everything, and he kept it in a steel box at the top of the stairs, and he paid for it with everything he had. I only read what he left. She looked out at the water, calm now under a washed pale sky. He'd want you to have the chart of it. All of you. It's no good to a boat if it's locked in a box. After the Providence, the fight went out of the other side all at once, the way a fire goes out when the wind that fed it turns. It is one thing for a resort company to argue a grieving widow off a worthless rock. It is another thing entirely to argue that the light which saved the Providence and her crew in front of the whole town should be put out, and the ledge left unmarked so that a hotel can be built. The county quietly withdrew its demolition order, and, not long after, its claim that the grant had been abandoned. No county wants to explain to a coast full of fishermen why it tried to darken the light that saved the Providence. The state archives confirmed, in a letter Merrick read aloud at the next town meeting, that the 1911 grant was genuine, recorded, and unbroken, and that title to the Weatherly Point Reservation and its described harbor frontage stood, lawfully and clearly, in the name of Hazel Thorne, which meant that the great Halloran Purchase was dead. A resort marina cannot be built on a waterfront when a stubborn widow holds clear federal title to the frontage at its heart and will not sell it for any money, and Hazel would not. She had learned from Eli's tax receipts exactly what he had been building, parcel by parcel, and she meant to finish it. Halloran withdrew its offer and took its money to a coast with a more cooperative harbor. And Royce Thorne, whose marine supply firm 2 towns over had indeed, as Merrick's inquiries finally established, held a signed contract to furnish out the Halloran Marina. A contract now worth nothing, left Ash Harbor and did not come back, and if Hazel grieved that, she grieved it quietly, and she never once spoke his name in the town. Coombs, the bank manager, came out to the point that spring, after the house on Cormorant Lane had gone to the bank, as they had both always known it would, and he stood at the cottage door with his hat in his hands much as Petrie had. And he did not know quite how to say the thing he had come to say. "I told you to sign that Lighthouse away, Hazel," he managed at last. "In your own kitchen, with Eli barely cold, I sat there and told you to sign it away to look sensible to my bank. And you'd have lost. All of this. The light, the harbor, everything Eli built." He looked at his hat. "I've been ashamed of that every day since the Providence came in. I wanted to say it to your face. You were doing your job, Harold," Hazel said, "and you gave me every week you could on the house. I've not forgotten that either." She did not say what she might have said, which was that half the town had told her the same, and that the sensible advice of an entire harbor had very nearly darkened it forever. She had learned from a dead man's ledger that being right is not the same as needing to be told you were right, and that the only use of the light was to keep it, not to hold it over anyone. "Come in out of the wind," she said instead. "The stove's lit. I'll make coffee, and you can tell me what a body has to do to lease back a net loft in this town, because I've a good many of them now, and I mean to see the right people in them." She did not gloat. That was the thing the town came to understand about the widow on the point, in the years that followed, the same way an earlier town had failed to understand her husband. She had been laughed at on the church steps, and pitied at the store, and pressed by her own dead husband's brother to sign away the one thing he had died to keep, and when the whole of it turned and ran the other way, she took no pleasure in the turning. She did not remind the councilmen how eager they had been to sell. She did not remind the town how it had laughed. When the county, red-faced, offered at last to buy the light from her for the state to run as a proper aid to navigation, she said no, gently, and kept it herself, and kept it burning, and asked only that they put the kelp ledge on the chart at last, which they did. And she did with Eli's waterfront the thing she understood, now, he had always meant to do. She held the deeds to the failing wharves and net lofts he had bought up one delinquent lien at a time, and one by one, as she was able, she sold them or leased them back, not to a resort, and not for a profit she needed, but to the fishermen who worked out of them at the price Eli had paid the taxes for, so that the harbor that had nearly been sold out from under them belonged, at the end, to the people who fished it. She hired old Suggs the boatwright to run a proper repair yard out of a net loft that had stood empty 10 years. She let the young men who could not have afforded a berth under Halloran keep their boats at the town wharf for what the upkeep cost, and not $1 more. The dying harbor of Ash Harbor did not die. It came back, slowly, the way the light had come back, one mended thing at a time, and at the mouth of it the weatherly light turned every night over the water kept by a widow marking the ledge, bringing the boats home. Hazel Thorne kept the light for the rest of her life. She lost the house on Cormorant Lane to the bank, as she had always known she would, and she did not much mourn it. She had a keeper's cottage on a headland and a light to keep, and a reason every evening to climb 200 stairs. She was not rich in the way the town measured riches, though she was never again poor in the way that had spelled terror at the kitchen table, for the harbor she had saved did not forget who had saved it. And a keeper of a working light that guards a charted ledge is a person a coast takes care of. But that was not why she climbed the stairs. She climbed them for the same reason Eli had climbed them, which she understood fully now, at last, having read every line he left and lived out the meaning of it. Because somewhere out on the water, on a night that had not come yet, a boat would come in from the dark with everything against it, and the difference between that boat coming home and that boat dying on a ledge no one had marked would be one small flame kept high by one person who had decided that keeping it was worth whatever it cost. She never emptied the steel box. She left it bolted at the top of the stairs where Eli had bolted it, and she added to it. Her own ledger entries now, in her own hand under his, the weather and the sea and the boats that passed and the boats brought safe, night after night, year after year, the record going on unbroken as it had gone on for 100 years. And she understood, keeping it, the whole of what her husband had been trying to tell her in the only language he had, which was not words but keeping, that the money had never been the point, that the house and the boat and the $1,043 had never been the point, that what a person leaves is not what they hoard, but what they keep lit for the ones who come after in the dark. They found her, years on, an old woman by then, in the chair in the lamp room where she had stood her watches, with the ledger open in her lap and the great lens turning over her still, gone quietly the way Eli had gone, with her work done and the flame burning. And the town of Ash Harbor, which had once laughed, did not laugh. It came out onto the water in every boat it had, in the gray dawn, and turned in a slow circle beneath the light she had kept, and went home. And that night some hand that was not hers climbed the 200 stairs and trimmed the wick and wound the clockwork and kept the weatherly light burning. And some hand has kept it ever since. Because that was the thing Hazel Thorne finally understood, kneeling long ago in the cold at the top of the stairs over a dead man's steel box, understanding at last the size of what she had been wrong about. That a light is not a possession. A light is a promise. It is the promise a person makes in the dark, at their own cost, to a stranger they will never meet, coming home on the worst night of their life with nothing left but the hope that someone, somewhere on the shore, thought them worth a flame. Eli had made that promise, and kept it in secret until it broke him, and Hazel had found it in a steel box and taken it up, and kept it in the open until it saved them all. And the promise did not end with either of them. It was never meant to. Keep the light on. Keep a little back, and a flame lit, for the one who comes in from the dark with nothing. The lamp is still burning. Somebody made sure of it. Somebody always has.